Amara stood at the window of her small mud-brick house, her hands trembling as she absent-mindedly stirred the pot of soup on the stove. The evening sun filtered through the tattered curtains, casting long golden streaks across the floor, but the beauty of the moment was lost on her. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, had become a prison, a place of fear, pain, and isolation. Her husband, Kola, had once been the pride of the village. Tall, handsome, and charismatic, he was everything a woman could desire in a man. But behind closed doors, Kola had become something else. The man she had married, the one who had once whispered sweet promises into her ears, had turned into a monster. The first time Kola had raised his hand against her, Amara had told herself it was an accident. He was under stress, she reasoned. After all, his business had been failing, and the pressures of village life had mounted on him. She had convinced herself that it was a one-time mistake, that he would change. But that change never came. Instead, the beatings became frequent, the insults sharper, and the isolation complete. She no longer attended gatherings in the village, no longer saw friends or family. Kola controlled every aspect of her life. The only reprieve she found was in the quiet moments, alone in the house before Kola returned from his drinking sprees. But even then, fear lingered in the air like a dark cloud. As the evening shadows deepened, Amara heard the familiar heavy footsteps approaching. Her heart skipped a beat. Kola had returned. She quickly set the pot of soup aside, wiping her hands on her apron. The door creaked open, and Kola stumbled in, his eyes red and his breath thick with the stench of alcohol. His face twisted into a sneer as he looked her over. "Is this what you cooked?" he growled, gesturing toward the pot. "You expect me to eat this?" Amara felt the sharp sting of his words but said nothing. Silence was her only defense now. Kola staggered toward her, his movements slow and unsteady. Without warning, he grabbed her arm, squeezing it with bruising force. "I work hard all day, and this is what I come home to? Useless woman." His slap came swiftly, the sting of his palm reverberating across her cheek. Amara fell to the floor, her vision blurring with tears. But she knew better than to cry out. Crying would only make it worse. "You're worthless," he spat before kicking over the pot of soup, its contents spilling across the dirt floor. As he stormed off to the back room, Amara lay there for a moment, her body shaking from the impact of the blow. But it wasn't just her body that hurt. Her spirit was breaking. Kola soon collapsed into a drunken slumber, leaving Amara alone in the dimly lit room. She rose slowly, cleaning the spilled soup from the floor, her mind racing. How had her life become this? What had she done to deserve such misery? She could no longer recall the last time she had smiled, the last time she had felt safe. The village knew of Kola's temper. They had seen the bruises, but no one said anything. No one came to help. The whispers about her were all the same. Amara was weak for staying, for not leaving her abusive husband. But they didn't know. They didn't understand how deep the chains of marriage, culture, and fear could bind a woman. As she cleaned, the weight of her thoughts grew unbearable. Kola's hatred, his cruelty, were suffocating her. She longed for freedom, for peace. But even in the darkest corners of her mind, she never imagined what was about to unfold. That night, Kola died. The sun had barely risen when the village erupted in chaos. News of Kola's death spread like wildfire. People gathered in small clusters, whispering, their faces twisted in shock and suspicion. Amara sat outside the house, her knees drawn up to her chest, her eyes swollen from the tears she could no longer shed. Kola's body had been found cold and lifeless in their bed. She didn't know how it had happened. When she had woken that morning, she had found him still, his face contorted in pain. Now, as she sat alone, the villagers' eyes bore into her, their whispers like daggers. "She killed him," one woman muttered. "I always knew she was no good," another chimed in. The accusations grew louder as the morning wore on. Soon, the village elders arrived, their stern faces and flowing robes a symbol of authority. Kola's family, led by his elder brother, stormed toward Amara with rage in their eyes. "You murdered him," Kola's brother shouted, pointing an accusing finger at her. "You killed my brother in cold blood." Amara's heart pounded in her chest. She shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "No, I didn't. I didn't touch him." But her pleas fell on deaf ears. The villagers had already made up their minds. Amara had always been an outsider in their eyes, the woman who stayed with a cruel husband instead of leaving him. Now, she was the murderer, the villain of the story. Mary, Amara's best friend, was the only one who dared to speak in her defense. She rushed forward, placing a protective arm around Amara. "Wait. You can't just accuse her without proof," Mary argued, her voice trembling with desperation. "You don't know what happened." But Kola's family was not interested in the truth. They were blinded by their grief and anger, and the villagers were too eager to see justice served. "The proof is right there," Kola's brother shouted, gesturing toward his lifeless body. "She was the only one with him last night. She did this." Amara's stomach churned. She couldn't breathe. The weight of the accusation crushed her spirit. She hadn't killed Kola, but no one believed her. They saw her bruises, her quiet suffering, and assumed she had finally snapped. The elders spoke among themselves, their voices low and grave. After what felt like an eternity, they turned to Amara, their faces unreadable. "You will be brought to trial," one of them said. "But if you are found guilty, the punishment is clear. You will be buried alive." The trial was nothing more than a formality. The villagers gathered in the village square, eager to watch the spectacle unfold. Amara stood before the council, her wrists bound, her body weak from sleepless nights and relentless fear. The council members, dressed in their ceremonial robes, sat on a raised platform, their faces set in stone. The air was thick with anticipation as they called witnesses, each one stepping forward with their version of events. None of them had seen what happened. None of them knew the truth. But that didn't matter. They all spoke of Kola's violent temper, of Amara's bruises and cuts, of the long-standing tension in their marriage. Kola's brother took the stand, his voice thick with emotion. "My brother was no saint," he admitted, "but he didn't deserve to die like this. Amara killed him in cold blood. She planned this." Mary, brave and loyal, stepped forward to defend Amara once more. She spoke of the abuse, the torment Amara had endured for years. She reminded the council that Amara had never fought back, never raised a hand against Kola, despite all that he had done. But it wasn't enough. The council deliberated briefly, and when they returned, their verdict was clear. They had no solid proof, but the weight of suspicion, the desire for justice, was too strong. "Amara," the head of the council intoned, his voice cold and final, "you have been found guilty of the murder of your husband, Kola. Your punishment is death. You will be buried alive." Amara's heart sank as the words left the elder's lips. She felt the ground shift beneath her feet as if the earth itself was preparing to swallow her whole. The village erupted in murmurs, but there was no compassion in their eyes, no empathy in their voices. She was led to the outskirts of the village, where the grave had already been dug, a shallow pit, just deep enough to bury a person alive. The villagers stood around it, some with solemn expressions, others with curiosity, as though they were watching a play unfold. Amara's knees buckled as she was brought to the edge of the grave. She looked down into the dark, cold earth, her mind struggling to comprehend the reality of what was about to happen.